Today, the Department of Justice, joined by 8 states, filed a civil antitrust lawsuit in the United States District Court. As alleged in our complaint, for 15 years, Google has pursued a course of anti-competitive conduct that has allowed it to halt the rise of rival technologies.
The reason why I wanted to talk about Google antitrust is that the last 20 years or something, we basically haven't had any antitrust litigation against almost any of the tech companies. We've had a few non-tech related, but on Google specifically, there's been a lot of discussion around Section 230 and its effect on censorship in general.
Currently, social media giants like Twitter receive an unprecedented liability shield based on the theory that they're a neutral platform. My executive order calls for new regulations under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to make it that social media companies that engage in censoring or any political conduct will not be able to keep their liability shield.
Let's face it. It is clear that tech companies have changed dramatically over the last 20 years, and we need to consider reforms to Section 230 to account for those changes. And while companies initially always complain that the rules are going to stifle innovation and destroy the industry, the truth is that a good regulatory environment usually ends up spurring innovation because it raises the bar on safety and quality, and it turns out that innovation can meet that higher bar.
We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online, ban targeted advertising to children, and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us.
Challenges the liability shield used to protect companies like Google, YouTube. Actually, Google is warning about this.
Yeah.
What's the warning? What are they saying?
Well, they say without that protection, the internet basically could be upended. We're talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It keeps tech companies from being liable for the content people create on various sites and services. But Google argues that without Section 230, companies wouldn't just be liable for speech that isn't theirs, but other tech companies would be forced to be even more forceful.
A priority of the new president and Congress will be reining in the giants of social media. On this, Democrats and Republicans agree. Their target is a federal law known as Section 230. In a single sentence, it set off the Big Bang, helping to create the universe of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest. Some critics of the law say that it leaves social media free to ignore lies, hoaxes, and slander that can wreck the lives of innocent people.
Section 230, a piece of legislation you may not understand yet, but have probably heard of by now. And the Biden administration thinks they moderate too little. President Donald Trump felt big tech companies censored content too much. But they're unified in thinking something's gotta give.
Consistently, the message from Senate Democrats is for Facebook and Twitter and Google to censor more, to abuse their power more, to silence voices that Senate Democrats disagree with more. That is very dangerous if we want to maintain a free and fair democracy, if we want to maintain free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of a free press. And yet there's an absolute silence from Democrats speaking up for the press outlets censored by big tech. There's an absolute silence for Democrats speaking out for the citizens silenced by big tech. Instead, there is a demand, use even more power to silence dissent, and that's a totalitarian instinct that I think is very dangerous.
So during the pandemic, people have been talking about the 230 protections for tech companies as a means to litigate the censorship. And all 230 is really talking about is the distinction between a platform that hosts independent creators' ability to talk, so bloggers, video, Twitter, social media, be able to post their content on a platform without holding the platform liable for anything that they say, so slander and libel. If it was a broadcaster, like a newspaper or a TV station or a radio station or something, then there has to be an editorial process because they are liable for the anything that the media personalities say. Beyond just talking about Section 230 or monopolies power that the government is bringing up with the Google antitrust as it relates to DoubleClick having a monopoly power on advertising. So when they acquired DoubleClick, they created the government is claiming that they created a monopoly for advertising. DoubleClick was rolled into AdSense. So it's not just search, but anyone that works with AdSense could put AdSense on their site and monetize advertising through Google AdSense. There's also the high-tech antitrust lawsuit that was started somewhere between 2007 and 2012. I think it was settled somewhere in 13 or 14. And basically what that alleges or was demonstrated in California anyways was that Google, Apple, Lucasfilm, Pixar, Sony, Adobe, Intuit, I think, and a handful of other companies colluded together to not hire each other's employees. And in doing so, they artificially fixed the prices of the wages. So this allowed these companies to control the cost of labor. But the other thing that it demonstrated was that these companies were talking to each other at a very high level, all the way to the CEOs. There's the Steve Jobs emails that kind of show all of this. But it also showed that, like, as a result of the Sony movie, The Interview, starring, I think, Seth Rogen and James DeFranco, they angered or pissed off the North Koreans by depicting an assassination attempt on Kim Jong-un, or is it Un or Il? I always get it confused. They went to work on hacking Sony's emails, and then the net result of the emails was they found all kinds of sensitive information around the hiring and firing of celebrities, picking directors for different movies, giving different politicians and business leaders the ability to censor things. Steve Jobs' emails were even found coordinating with Sony about some of this stuff. But, you know, like as it relates, and the thing about Apple is they have a big a relationship with Disney. And so they were dragged into this as well. And basically it showed that, you know, in some of these emails, Steve Jobs' emails, that he was getting angry with recruiters at Google that were recruiting Apple engineers to go work on Google products, even though they share board seats. Like Eric Schmidt famously was on the board of Apple, even though Google was developing Android the same time Apple was developing iOS. And so that on its face looks like a conflict of interest where you have two competing companies on each other's board developing competing products, the iOS, iPhones versus Androids. I didn't really hear Microsoft pop up in those discussions, but also Microsoft didn't really go that far with Microsoft Surface or their phone. They kind of bowed out of that and focused more on cloud. But anyways, Steve Jobs famously found out about a recruiter recruiting some engineer that was important to him. So he calls up Eric Schmidt and yells at him and says, "Hey, why are you recruiting my engineer without my permission? Fire that recruiter." And then furthermore, here's the proper channels when you do want to potentially poach one of my engineers, and I'll respect it when I'm poaching some of Google's engineers. But again, this is more than just Google and Apple. It's a whole bunch of them. And basically, they would have to get permission to recruit from one of each other's companies. And what came with that was also their salary compensation. If they say, like, they gave you permission to hire one of their engineers, they're like, whatever. I don't care if this guy stays or goes. maybe I would get rid of him in the next layoff anyways.
That's weird. They always travel in groups of 5. These programmers, there's always a tall, skinny white guy, short, skinny Asian guy, fat guy with a ponytail, some guy with crazy facial hair. It's like they trade guys until they all have the right group.
You clearly have a great understanding of humanity.
They would also give them information like their performance evaluations, their salary compensations. That way, if they gave him 5 or 10 grand over what he's currently making, it's not really going to affect the overall compensation for all employees. Because if enough employees get word that, hey, they're paying 50 grand more over here, or there's a bidding war, and so now it's the highest bidder sort of scenario, all they really did was, by poaching from each other, was create make it more expensive for themselves.
As I prepare for my coding interview, I solve 1,513 LeetCode problems, memorize all of the answers, don't understand shit but memorize every keyword, sharding, caching, load balancing, read cracking the coding interview 5 times, go on LinkedIn to stalk my interviewer, check their Facebook, check their Twitter, check their wife. Damn, I'm so smart.
And so they're definitely playing a team sport here. I mean, it even reminds me of the Yahoo days where I think Yahoo and was it Yahoo and Google? No, it was Yahoo and Microsoft had like a search deal for some time as Bing was being developed. And they created a no poaching list where Microsoft wasn't allowed to poach from Yahoo and vice versa, not without permission. So the same thing was going on between Google and Apple, Sony, and friends. And so in addition to the Section 230 issues, in addition to the censorship and propaganda issues, I want to talk a little bit about the high-tech antitrust. And a lot of this stems back to the 90s with Bill Gates and Microsoft, when Microsoft was going through the antitrust litigation over Windows.
19, the United States put Silicon Valley in its crosshairs.
Only a very small number of the nearly 2 billion apps in the App Store are made by Apple.
To some, these hearings recall another major antitrust case, a showdown between the Justice Department and Microsoft. At the heart of the case was a new product, the Internet Explorer web browser. Prosecutors argued that Microsoft used its market power to stifle the growth of competing browsers. Leaders from Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple are studying big cases like Microsoft to prepare for their scrutiny. Lesson number 1, how not to counter an antitrust probe. The Justice Department deposed Microsoft's CEO, Bill Gates.
Bill Gates' behavior, his body language is contemptuous, arrogant.
The product that didn't include Internet Explorer is called the Windows 95 upgrade. The full breadth of your question?
And evasive. And the judge later said, Microsoft, you lost me on day 1.
In 1995, Microsoft was served a court order for its anti-competitive activities in software licensing. After viewing the tape, Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson, in his decision, he called for Microsoft to be broken up. But on appeal, a panel faulted the judge's conduct, as well as some of his conclusions. It threw out parts of the ruling. Microsoft narrowly escaped a breakup. According to Kovacic, the legend of the Gates tape haunts today's tech reps when they testify before Congress.
The net result of the Microsoft antitrust was that it was Apple versus Microsoft. Microsoft won as Apple was going bankrupt. But then because of the Microsoft antitrust litigation, the politicians at the time, I think led by the Democrats, our old friend Al Gore, for example, helped broker that deal, I believe, and earned himself a board on the seat with Apple, was saying, hey, okay, Microsoft, if you don't want us breaking you up, we have to create some competition for personal computers. So if you help revive Apple, now you don't have a monopoly anymore. You now have a duopoly. So that at least there's 2 competitors, and we'll get off your back. but hey, Apple, for us doing this solid and pulling back the litigation, we want some concessions from you too. And so Al Gore took that in the form of business contacts, but also in the form of a board seat on Apple's board. And I think he made like 40 million off of Apple stock. But it also drew the tech companies together, because all of a sudden all these tech companies are like, well, we're afraid of the government breaking us up. We have to play by their rules. And then when 9/11 and all that happened, it's like, well, okay, because of 9/11, we have to work with the government to do all these things. And so we might as well work with the government as opposed to against the government. And there was a lot going on there. I talked about it in other videos, but
the government to protect us from corporations. You were talking about breaking up big tech earlier.
Yeah.
I think a mistake that we should not make is what they did to Rockefeller with his Standard Oil. They broke it up into like 7 or 8 oil companies, and then he made more money off of these new. So like breaking up Facebook into Facebook Prime, Facebook Messenger, Instagram as different companies, Mark would still have the code. He'd still be able to run software like that. So I'm thinking we need to make them free their software code so that other people can spin up versions of those websites, interlock them. My version of Facebook can interoperate with Mark Zuckerberg's version.
Big tech had a huge influence in this latest midterm election.
When Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter was finalized last October, he quickly instituted sea changes in Twitter's operations, which have become notorious for censoring off-narrative information and views. In the 3 months since, Musk has released an incriminating stream of internal documents revealing what some experts assess to be proof of shocking government censorship at the highest levels.
Is that today's conspiracy theories are tomorrow's Pulitzer Prizes?
Let's bring the first batch of Twitter files into the conversation, the one that Matt Taibbi exposed.
Has anything been surprising to you? Going into it, I thought that the relationship between these security agencies like the FBI and the DHS and companies like Twitter and Facebook, I thought it was a little bit less formal. What we find is that it's not that very formalized. They have a really intense structure that they've worked out over a period of years where they have regular meetings. They have a system where the DHS handles censorship requests that come up from the states, and the FBI handles the international ones, and they all float all these companies, and it's a big bureaucracy, and I don't think we expected to see that. Like that they're so comfortable with the idea that the government should be involved in this censorship of what turns out to be true information, especially when in regards to the Hunter Biden laptop. I think that shows you the mentality, right? Yeah.
Like, what he did was confirm that a completely true story by the New York Post about Hunter Biden that came out a month before the election was suppressed by Twitter executives, including at the behest of FBI agents and former security state officials. So this has now been exposed. There was no legitimate basis for suppressing that story. It was true. It was a respected publication. They did it anyway. This is election interference. You know, the same people who pride themselves on strengthening democracy are engaged in this wide-scale censorship of one side of the political debate. And then they puff out their chest and say, we're protecting democracy. They're not protecting democracy. They're interfering with democracy. They're interfering with the public's right to know. This is very much like a Big Brother social credit system that was being perpetrated.
Alarm bells should be going off.
I did not go to medical school.
I'm sorry?
I did not go to medical school.
That's what I thought. Why do you think you or anyone else at Twitter had the medical expertise to censor a doctor's expert opinion?
Our policies regarding COVID were designed to protect individuals. We were seeing...
You guys censored Harvard-educated doctors, Stanford-educated doctors, doctors that are educated in the best places in the world, and you silenced those voices. I have another question, my last one for you, Ms. Gaddy. Did the U.S. government ever contact you or anyone at Twitter to pressure Twitter to moderate or censor certain tweets? Yes or no?
We have a program.
Did the U.S. government ever contact you or anyone at Twitter to censor or moderate certain tweets? Yes or no?
We receive legal demands to remove content from the platform from the U.S. government and governments all around the world. Those are published on a third-party website, and anyone can review them.
Thank God for Matt Taibbi. Thank God for Elon Musk for allowing to show us in the world that Twitter was basically a subsidiary of the FBI.
I mean, to be totally frank,
almost every conspiracy theory that people had about Twitter turned out to be true. So, is there a conspiracy theory about Twitter that didn't turn out to be true? So far, they've all turned out to be true. And if not, more true than people thought.
Is there a part of the files that really shocked you more than the rest of them? Like, of the things that have been disclosed, of all of these things, is there something that really sticks out with you as like, holy shit, I had no idea this was happening? Or is the whole thing just a big dumpster fire? They were just looking at one huge thing. Like PSYOPs versus the Hunter Biden thing versus the...
Yeah.
The number of FBI people involved, that was pretty shocking.
FBI stuff is pretty intense.
Yeah, the FBI PSYOP stuff to me was probably the one that was the most insidious. Like, the rest of it I could think of like, a bunch of overzealous libs got used.
Yeah.
Got it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But to have like a secure skiff that essentially sends things that, government agents want the populace to basically think, it seems like out of a really bad dystopian novel. And then it turns out it existed. And then the thing is, it couldn't have just existed at Twitter. So what are we going to do about all the other places where this shit's happening?
YouTube, Facebook, yeah.
That's why
they're becoming a huge, powerful entity that, of course, also now we're finding out through the Twitter files work for the private intelligence agencies.
When Facebook says, okay, well, like, we're going to target this exact population of people with this age range and this zip code, that is a donation to a political party and a political movement and should be subject to the same caps that any other American would be subject to.
When you notice Facebook, Instagram, everybody kind of giving Trump, reinstating him on the accounts, maybe a lot of these guys are sitting there saying, dude, let's just make sure they don't target and find out our freaking YouTube files. What if they find out Facebook files and Instagram files? Holy shit, if they figure this part out. So listen, let's kind of accommodate. Let's kind of slow our roll on the strikes and the banning and this and that, and let's kind of let people loose a little bit more. Let's kind of know that this is going to be the year of investigations. Fauci and Twitter files and Biden and Hunter Biden and all, they're going to be investigating everybody. Let's just pump the brake.
Last Friday morning, as you know, around 2 a.m., police arrived at the home of the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. It's in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. Inside the home, they found Pelosi's 82-year-old husband, Paul, and another man, 40 years younger, called David DePappy. In full view of the police, DePappy hit Paul Pelosi in the head 2 times with a hammer. Both Pelosi and DePappy were then taken immediately to a local hospital. Pelosi for his head injuries and DePappy for reasons that are still not clear. At this point, that's what we can say for certain. David DePappy assaulted Paul Pelosi with a hammer. But beyond those facts, there is much in this story that remains muddy. How, for example, did DePappy get inside the Pelosi's home? She has her own security. She has the Capitol Police. They fly all the way out here from Washington, D.C. with her. And yet, in this case, San Francisco DA Brooke Jenkins says that there was no security present at the Pelosi home on Friday night. Well, accounts of that are changing. At the first press conference on Friday, San Francisco police suggested there was a third person in the home when police arrived, and Politico dutifully reported that. Quote, officers arrived at the house, knocked on the front door, and were led inside by an unknown person. In other words, by a person who was not David DePappy or Paul Pelosi. Just 2 days later, Politico, the same publication, attacked anyone who repeated its own reporting as a crazed conspiracy monger. Quote, pro-Trump commentators weighed in online to raise questions about the investigation based on unfounded and false claims. Among those baseless claims, that a third person answered the door when police arrived at the Pelosi home.
Hi, how you doing?
How are you?
What's going on, man?
Everything's good.
Hi. Drop the hammer.
Nope. Hey.
What is going on right now?
I'm not getting an answer on call.
Bro,
This is San Francisco Police. Do you need help?
Oh, well, there's a gentleman here just waiting for my wife to come back, Nancy Pelosi. He's just waiting for her to come back, but she's not going to be here for a day, so I guess we'll have to wait.
Okay, do you need police, fire, or medical for anything?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Is the Capitol Police around?
No, this is San
They usually
Francisco.
protect my wife. They're usually here at the house protecting my wife. This gentleman just came into the house, and he wants to wait here for my wife to come home. Anyway, he told me to put his phone down.
Do you know who the person is?
No, I don't know who he is. He has this. He's telling me. He's telling me not to. He's telling me not to do anything. He's telling me to put the phone down and just do what he says. Okay.
Okay. What's the gentleman's name?
I don't know. What's that? My name's David. The name is David.
Okay. And who is David?
I don't know. What's that? I'm a friend of theirs. Yeah. He says he's a friend. But as I say, I've never.
But you don't know who he is?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
He's telling me I'm being very leading, so I got to stop talking to you, okay?
Okay. You sure I can stay on the phone with you just to make sure everything's okay?
No, he wants me to get that off the phone, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information he received from you?
No, absolutely not. Okay. Thank you.
Should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review. But if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market, and we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Nancy Pelosi, the new stock-picking genius. For the last 3 years, her stock-picking strategies have consistently beat the S&P 500. She's grown her wealth by an estimated $16.7 million in 2020 alone, and she reportedly has a net worth of around $100 million. Both her and her husband recently locked in a $5.3 million profit from Alphabet call-ops. They invested in Apple during the June 2021 tech dip. That also includes a $1 million bet into Tesla and bullish bets on Disney. And to top it all off, a $5.5 million investment in big tech right before the shutdown in 2020. Needless to say, now people believe that either her and her husband are stock-picking oracles, or they have inside knowledge into the stocks and companies that are about to see explosive growth.
Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, sold 30,000 shares of Google stock just weeks before the Justice Department opened its antitrust lawsuit against Google. Where do you stand on this idea of banning stock trades for members of Congress and their spouses?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a long time kind of pattern of the Pelosi's of trading these stocks right before bad news comes to these companies and their stock prices affected. I think that members of Congress certainly, if they have access to insider information, should not trade stocks. And since these keep happening, these types of trades keep happening, I think they should not be allowed to do these type of favorable trades.
Let's put this up there on the screen. Nancy Pelosi reportedly, with her husband, sold $3 million actually worth of the stock just 4 weeks ago. So the next one we can put up there on the screen, it actually shows you the exact trades that were disclosed in the periodic transaction report. You could see it right there. Several trades, all that just hit in the last weeks of December. And what do we see? We see trades between $500,000 to $1 million, all of Class A stock that were being made. And the real question is why? I mean, you represent a lot of people from Google. You should not be trading Google, period.
Did you see Nancy Pelosi defend insider trading?
I was just about to ask.
What? What'd
you
she say? People
like
were freaking out about it. I think it was Crystal and Sagar.
She's
just
bypassing all the laws to make hella cash. She looks so guilty.
How much does she make a year?
She just funnels it to her husband, like, no, he made the money, not me, technically.
Mr. Gates is recognized.
A Fortune.com piece entitled Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband cashed in on big tech just as Congress was set to pounce. In that article, there's discussion of the spouse of the Speaker of the House making a $6 million call on stocks that netted $5.3 million while we're not moving these bills. And it might be bad for big tech. The Speaker's spouse goes and buys all this big tech stock, and then lo and behold, here we are with the bills not called up. And it just makes you wonder, did somebody know something? Was somebody acting on information? And it could have been the power of the lobbyists and all the money that they donate to members of Congress on both sides. It could have been people like Tim Cook calling, but...
The reason why I'm bringing up the whole Nancy Pelosi thing, Paul Pelosi, is because this is kind of what we've been seeing from them, is that not only does the government have a vested interest from like a defense perspective or an intelligence gathering perspective, they also trade stocks. They're insider traders. So in addition to lobbyists, they also get inside knowledge on what's going on in the industries because of their positions. And so then they align themselves with the legislation that they're either going to pass or vote for or vote against. And then they personally can benefit just with this insider information. So between the lobbyist telling them stuff and between the legislation that they have privilege access to and a direct effect on, can play the stock market. The other reason why I bring it up is it feels like they're building monopolies on purpose. Since the just like the Microsoft thing where they brokered a deal to revive Apple and then put themselves on the board for it, they don't necessarily want 1,000 different companies to have to regulate and talk about all the time. It's easier if you have like a handful. So by approving all these merger and acquisitions, you get fewer companies that you can extort or that would lobby with, or fewer people tearing at you for special treatment or something. And so, and I think there's lots of reasons why you want a monopoly, but it feels like the government has been intentionally allowing monopolies or meganopolies or these strange business practices to continue for some reason. I'm guessing that all the reasons I mentioned earlier have to do with it, but it seems like they've been suppressing the antitrust in favor of building up these mega corporations, for better or worse.
I went one time for 13 days without sleeping and smoking crack and drinking vodka exclusively throughout that entire time.
The other thing to note about the Paul Pelosi thing is that just like Hunter Biden laptop, they were suppressing that story. So they were using all their influence on tech and media to suppress the Paul Pelosi house attack. And they suppressed the video from the police department, and they were trying to make it sound like some dude just broke in and there was nothing suspicious going on. But eventually and this was going on during the stock trading stuff. And shortly after the Hunter Biden thing, but as that whole thing was being prosecuted in the media for suppression, this comes out. So it was super suspicious. And then when the body cam footage came out, it looked super suspicious. It looked like something definitely was going on that shouldn't have been going on. And it just shows how many layers of corruption there is. A lot of people like to think that this is a recent thing or that America's going to end. And I'm kind of thinking like, it seems like this has been going on longer than I've been alive. So I don't know if it's better or worse. I just think it's probably a lot more complex than it used to be. But anyways, let's listen.
Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer has raised its full-year sales estimate for the COVID-19 vaccine to $45 billion. In the last quarter, the company's total sales reached almost $26 billion, $10 billion of that due to the vaccine. Over half of Americans who have received a jab have been administered the co-developed Pfizer and BioNTech version. The multinational also benefited from stronger sales of its other drugs due to great...
But Fauci's like the highest paid government employee. They make their money when they get out.
Over the period of time from 2010 to 2016, 27,000 royalty payments were paid to 1,800 NIH employees. We know that. Not because you told us, but because we forced you to tell us through the Freedom of Information Act. Over $193 million was given to these 1,800 employees. Can you tell me that you have not received a royalty from any entity that you ever oversaw the distribution of money in research grants?
You know, I don't know as a fact, but I doubt it.
Why don't you reveal how much you've gotten and from what entities? The NIH refuses. They refuse to tell us. They sent it redacted. Can you tell me if anybody on the vaccine approval committees ever received any money from people who make the vaccines?
According to the regulations, people who receive royalties are not required to divulge them, even on their financial statement, according to the Bayh-Dole Act. The only royalties I have was my lab and I made a monoclonal antibody for use in vitro reagent that had nothing to do with patients.
It's all
Get that
redacted, and you can't get any information on the 1800 scientists.
Your time is
So
up.
we want to know whether
Senator
or not
Paul.
people got money from the people who made the manufacturer.
Senator Paul.
Bombshell report confirming what many in the media called a conspiracy theory that Dr. Fauci's agency profited off of the COVID vaccines.
The National Institute of Health, that people were saying did own pieces of the witch's brew that was the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
We know that now because the New York Times confirmed that Moderna will pay out the federal government for the technology that it used in the COVID vaccine to the tune of $400 million.
It's an amazing revelation. No, you're a conspiracy theorist that Dr. Fauci's and his agency's making money off of COVID vaccines. Really?
Yeah, what's so upsetting about this is that the corruption is not limited to just trading stocks based off of legislation, but other agencies, like they mentioned Dr. Fauci with the NIH, is able to trade the research that the government was actually producing through the National Institutes of Health Sciences, and was able to give the research or the patents for the said research to corporations who then give them back royalties or kickbacks and all kinds of stuff. And since we were talking about Bill Gates earlier, apparently Gates, the Gates Foundation, does a lot with Fauci and friends. And with the World Health Organization, he created like a whole bunch of companies to corner the market on vaccines, and participates in all these war games, troubleshoot how they would respond to outbreaks. Hence Agenda 201, something like that. But there's a bunch of them. Robert Kennedy Jr., RFK, outlines it in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. So it has a circular effect. It's not just like they're making money off of the legislation and the lobby. They also, the institutions are creating incidents that will then come back around as an emergency, which gives the government yet more power to enact other legislation.
The world is on the brink of a great scientific achievement. A COVID-19 vaccine. These vaccines will allow us to save millions of lives. They'll allow us to develop a plan for the world to globally eliminate COVID-19. To achieve this goal, if everything goes well, the cost of this intervention could be only a few $100s or even under $100. Wow. If things went really well. We know vaccines are a miracle. They've saved millions of lives. But exactly how do they work? Well, they connect to the human immune system, which is itself really phenomenal. The idea of the vaccine is, instead of having to get sick the first time, like a foreign bug, teach the immune system the shape of this foreign object so it's ready to attack with antibodies very, very quickly, so you can avoid lots of diseases if you've been properly vaccinated. Gavi came up with the money and a plan to get vaccines out to all the kids of the world. And these vaccines that Gavi got out have been critical to that.
In a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life, and it could save the lives of those you love.
$32 billion and $22 billion, respectively. For the quarter, it looks like a big beat for the COVID vaccine, coming in at more than $13 billion. Analysts were looking for about $10.5 billion.
Many of us are frustrated with the nearly 80 million Americans who are still not vaccinated, even though the vaccine is safe, effective, and free. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units. So tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated.
The vaccines have been the miracle, but even there, they don't block some amount of infection. I had 4 vaccines, the last one just a few weeks ago. So you get these breakthrough infections. That means we still have a lot of transmission.
So you had two vaccinations and then 2 booster shots. Is that right?
That's right. And
when do you get boosted again? I've only gotten 3 shots total, only been boosted once. I guess we have immunity for a little while,
But, to be safe, every 6 months, you're probably going to be vaccinated. As we get more data, they might even make that shorter for people who are say 60 or over 70. So we're in for ongoing vaccination to stay absolutely safe. We also need to fix the 3 problems with vaccines. The current vaccines are not infection blocking. They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people. And every one of those things is fixable. In fact, doing that work is going to help vaccinology very, very broadly.
That was Microsoft billionaire and philanthropist Bill Gates speaking on the coronavirus mRNA vaccines.
He was an investor in BioNTech, which developed the mRNA vaccine for Pfizer. We were just doing some digging, and we see that he actually sold a lot of those shares at how much profit was that?
10x. So he invested $55 million in BioNTech back in 2019, and it's now worth north of $550 million. So yeah, he certainly has profited a great deal.
Let's follow that trajectory. Invests heavily in BioNTech. This is the future. All in, sells it. Makes a huge amount of money. Now it's like, yeah, it's a little, it's okay. It could be better. But what we really need is this breath spray.
How do you deal with conspiracy theories? People believe you're tracking people through microchips inserted into the vaccine. I mean, given
we've given billions for vaccines and saved millions of lives. If you just kind of invert that and say, no, we're trying to make money from vaccines and not trying to save lives, that's a popular conspiracy theory. I don't know why they think I'm interested in knowing people's locations. That one I still have to laugh at, but if it's holding people back from getting vaccinated, then that's tragic.
Enter the Digital Vaccine Certificate, or Vaccine Passport. Common Pass is just one of several initiatives launched by private, nonprofit, and for-profit groups in the past year. When a patient is vaccinated, their participating doctor or clinic creates a unique digital certificate. When the vaccinated patient travels, they open the pass with biometric ID or thumbprint. The airline, venue, or office scans the pass matched to their ticket and identification.
Now we are in a pilot phase with many different companies.
If you're an Apple user, you can now keep a digital version of your COVID-19 vaccination card conveniently in your Apple Wallet. Providers can digitally sign the documents, then you can store them in the Health app. You can also transfer your vaccine card to the Apple Wallet in order to display it. The wallet card shows your name, which COVID-19 vaccine you received, the dates of your doses, and the health care provided, and a QR code.
The Gates Foundation profited millions of dollars on the vaccines. Millions and millions of dollars. It's all easy to find. And then once he dumped the stock, then he completely changed his narrative and he started talking about how ineffective the vaccines were and about how the virus wasn't as bad as we thought it was and about it was mostly targeting old and obese people. Like, this is wild, because this is the same guy that through the entire pandemic was talking about how great these vaccines are, and these vaccines are so effective, and they stop the virus, and they stop transmission, they stop infection, and all that was a lie, and he profited off those lies.
Yes.
And everyone wants to pretend that he's just like this amazing philanthropist. Like, no, he made a lot of money. This is motivated by money, and his entire career he's been motivated by money.
It's not even just about money, it's about power as well. And I guess, in government or politics, it's always about power. Money is just a tool in how you do it. Or it might work on individuals for a while, but at some point, you don't need any more money. Hence Trump. Trump's got plenty of money. So he's not necessarily doing it for money, although he could make a lot of money. But a lot of these other senators and congressmen, when they're juniors, probably don't have that much. But as they become more established, become wealthy, like Nancy Pelosi, it changes your attitude towards money. It changes your attitude towards the lobbyists on what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and what kind of legislation you're willing to pass. You can go one of two ways. It could either make it so that you're not interested in money, or you become uninterested in power. Like you're like, oh, I have the power, so I can do whatever I want. Or maybe I don't have standards or morality. I've prostituted myself out so many times, like I have no standards, so whatever goes. And then that's an easier discussion because it's less stress and you don't have to think that hard. You just do what the lobbyists tell you. So I think it has a way of turning people into puppets.
As the youngest member of the Senate, the one, therefore, who may expect the longest career there, I wonder if you'd say to us, since it's clear that you're not corrupt and you got elected, why should people think that the system produces corrupt results when there you are?
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though. The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact you have to go to those people who have money. And they always want something. I think it's the most degrading experience in the world to have to go out and ask for money, because you know that unless you accidentally agree with the position taken by the person or group that has the money, that you run the risk of deciding whether or not you're going to prostitute yourself to give the answer you know they want to hear in order to get funded to run for that office. And it's coincidental in many instances when in fact you happen to agree with where they are.
Hey, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez an insider now? She voted to expand NATO, voted to fund the Iron Dome, voted for the CARES Act, voted for $40 billion to Ukraine, deferred to caucus leadership on a coup, voted to give cops more money, wouldn't fight for Medicare for all in a pandemic because 15-hour was more doable, and didn't fight for that either. Just to let you know, Matt Gaetz and a handful of right-wingers extracted amazing concessions for their vote for Speaker. That's what they were supposed to do 2 years ago for forced to vote, and they didn't. I mean, meaning her and the squad. They could have done the exact same thing. They could have gotten all kinds of concessions because Nancy Pelosi couldn't become Speaker without their vote. So somebody asks her on a live stream, "Hey, why didn't you do the same thing that they did 2 years ago?"
Oh boy.
You ready? Here we go.
And it really goes to show how much you need of a coalition in order to really forcefully negotiate for these things. So when people say, why don't we do this? First of all, there's a lot of cost and dysfunction. Second of all, those people who are holding out right now, they may have made certain structural gains, but they have also made incredible reputational and relational harm within their caucus. And so if you are trying to get something done within your caucus moving forward, you still need members of your caucus. And that at the core is an element of electoral politics that is simply inescapable.
And she is officially renouncing her Bring the Ruckus, that she's an institutionalist. I'll tell you what she just said again. The Freedom Caucus won, she says. But they really lost because now everybody hates them. And then how are they going to get things done now that everybody hates them? They already got everything done they wanted done. They got it.
You would think you would turn into more of a line of the Senate or something where you're just like, well, I got plenty of money, I got me, so I'm just going to do what's best for the job. But that's harder. So it seems like if you're a weak-willed or have poor morality or ethics, you're more likely to be the puppet.
Don't forget to smash that subscribe button.
We are anonymous. We are legion. United as one. Divided by zero. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
No expression, hide my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kinda funny, I find it kinda sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Large and open. me.